I've been tracking the reaction to climate change, as you can imagine, for decades. And I categorize the reactions to climate change in four large groups. One is those who deny the science, deny the effects. And honestly, I used to try to talk some sense into those people. I don't waste my time anymore just because it is so ludicrous. And also because that group is just getting smaller and smaller. So we don't have to worry about that anymore. I actually wonder why I put so much energy into it 20 or 30 years ago. Then there is a second group that worries me deeply, and that is the indifference group. Right. That to me is more pernicious and more destructive, in fact, even more irresponsible than denial. It is the indifference.
It's apathy.
It's apathy. Yeah. This doesn't have to do with me. This is about someone else. It's going to happen anyway after my lifetime. Really? Just go outside and see if that's true. But that indifference of I will be able to either protect myself or exempt myself or buy my way out of it.
Get off the planet.
Yeah, that indifference to me is something that I really have a very hard time embracing. May I be very upfront about that. Then there is a third group, which is the doom and gloom group. And I actually get very excited about that group because there's so much energy there. There's so much energy. There is so much power and passion way down here in the gut, right? That I just think like, wow, that is a potential that can be unleashed toward good. It's the indifference when you don't care, that's really worrisome to me. But those who understand, and many times these are people who have actually studied the science, are very, very fluent, very knowledgeable, really, really understand, and have fallen into the dark box of doom and gloom. But for me, that's not a sealed box. That's a box to be opened. And that's a box from which a lot can bloom. That to me is the compost out of which much good can happen in an Aikido. We were talking last night about Aikido, in an Aikido way, right? How do you turn that energy in to the kind of energy that we need? So to me, that's the most exciting group of people because there's so much potential there that has not been cared for, that has not been harvested and further fertilized. So that's the group that I'm actually most excited about. And then, of course, there's the group of us, and I'm sorry that I'm not most excited about us, but that's the group of people who have already decided to take action. And that's fantastic. There are too few. We really have to move and focus on the movable middle that I think is very much in the doom and gloom box right now, but that can be moved forward. And so I love your idea, Rebecca, of something as simple as an infographic because about what can I do as an individual? Because the fact that we as individuals can have an impact on our own personal life, on our family's life, on our town's life, on our city, state, country, on the planet. It's very difficult for people who are not used to thinking and acting systemically. What I mean is at all levels of the system at the same time, and understanding that what is present at one level of the system is present at all levels of the system. And that by impacting any level of the system, you're impacting the whole. That kind of thinking is not necessarily accompanying all of those who want to take action. And so to make that very evident and unpeel that and show how every single person can take, and I'm just using action as a proxy word, can do, can engage with the world in many different ways. I would actually not be able to write a comprehensive list of what any person can do because the list is unending. Thank heavens, right? Which means that out of a limited list, I and you and anybody else can choose the 10 or 20 or 30 things that make more sense to me, that I'm more passionate about, where I think I can have more of an impact. But across those four buckets, what I am grateful and very excited about is that I do think that there is a growing scale of people who are in buckets 3 and 4. And that's where the gold is, right? That's where the value is in buckets 3 and 4 that I don't see as mutually exclusive at all. I see them as actually complementary to each other.
And does 4 include the people who want to see climate action, believe it can happen, but can't find their place?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I feel like everything in the mainstream tells people that individuals have no power, et cetera, that doesn't give them things to do except the personal virtue of dealing with your climate footprint, not participating in systemic change. We get very few stories of how the world actually gets changed. And one of my pet peeves is the plethora of superhero movies and versions in which heroism is essentially the ability to inflict and survive violence, and that's how you save the city, the maiden, change, stop the bad guys, etc. And that the way the world actually gets changed is usually by much less macho skills of being able to cohere a group, motivate people, incredible stubbornness, because a lot of change is going to take years to decades, and kind of keep your eye on the prize, clarity about who you are and what you're there for. And so I feel, and this again brings us back to story, that people are given so few stories, about the fact that we have power, about how the world gets changed, about how many times grassroots groups, coalitions, civil society has triumphed over bad government, bad corporations, etc. And so so I feel like part of activating people is giving them these stories of their own power and of how the world gets changed that are so different than what Hollywood, and kind of popular entertainment gives. And politicians don't usually like to tell us that either. And the media does a really bad job mostly with covering those stories and really with covering any story that's very incremental. Often the way that we see change is that a piece of legislation passes or a Supreme Court decision gets handed down or something, and it really is treated as though these powerful people made this decision. Unfortunately, with the abortion decision in the Supreme Court before us, we can see power working towards horrific ends as well as towards good ones. But I'll take marriage equality in the Supreme Court of the United States in 2015, where, yes, a majority of justices decided in favor of marriage equality, but only because queer people for decades had taken incredibly heroic and courageous stands, stood up, spoken out, told their friends, their family, their coworkers, their community who they were, so that what was considered normal and appropriate and just had radically transformed, even from the Supreme Court decisions of 15 years earlier. And so when you see the whole train of events, you see that it begins at the grassroots, in the margins, in the shadows, and that the powerful people who decided the world should be different were not the people in the center. They were the people on the edges, and ultimately the people in the center obeyed them. So those are the kinds of stories I like to tell.
I think one of one of the stories is sitting to your left.
But
Well,
I mean, I cannot believe what you did in Paris.
We did, because there were thousands of people doing it.
But, in a way, your psyche was, the leverage point that created the sense of community that made that decision
Only
possible.
because it was shared, right?
Yeah,
the sense of possibility
exactly.
was shared.
Yeah,
But
I'd love for you to go into that a little bit. I mean, people have heard the story, but I want to hear it again. Sorry.
I don't know that I can stomach telling it again, but let's see if we can get to it. But I did want to say, Rebecca, that in all fairness, I do see that they're not all media, but I do see some channels in media really stepping up to the challenge. And it just comes to mind Time in the United States, The Guardian in the UK, and Netflix, just to name three, but there are many more, who have finally decided enough is enough. Enough is enough of only covering the bad news or, in fact, the lies that we're being told by climate deniers, and who really are stepping up in a very, very courageous leadership position among the media industry to say, right, we need to get on the right side of history here, and we need to exercise our influence over the reading or the viewing public and be able to give the facts as they are and inspire with stories. So I think that we should, open that space for media to finally get with the program, because they are.
I'm a Guardian columnist, so in some sense I am the media, and I totally agree. The media has gotten a lot better. The Washington Post and a number of other major newspapers now have pretty good climate coverage, though it tends to focus more on bad news than good news, which is usually very incremental. It's not the dramatic thing that happened yesterday, but the exponential curve of something that's, or the technological breakthrough, or it's changes of consciousness that only show up in surveys and polls and voting patterns and things like that. So I think they've gotten better, but I still feel a real lack of stories. And I've seen, as somebody who's been an activist for almost 40 years, often young men in particular are attracted to violence because it's so frustrating. How can, we've done all these things to get the fossil fuel industry to stop doing this, to do that. And of course it's partly they don't remember. We have stopped pipelines. We have stopped, drilling. We have changed finance and permitting and other things, but it is still frustrating. And they imagine violence as the most direct way to change things. Don't imagine that it often backfires and direct and indirect ways.
Well, as
And so
an
that's-
antidote to that,
Yeah.
I do chair the Earthshot Prize, which is the most distinguished environmental prize founded by Prince William. And we have been now in operation for 3 years. This year, we had over 600 nominations of brilliant, absolutely brilliant initiatives across the world. And we have now the very difficult task of choosing 15 finalists, which is very difficult because you actually want to give a prize to all 600. And then from the 15 finalists, the 5 winners. And honestly, it's a very difficult task. That's good news. That's very good news, that it is a difficult task for the jury group to choose 15 finalists and out of those 5 winners, because the world is really mushrooming with brilliant, committed people who want to make a difference.
And of all ages.
And of all ages.
This is one of the things that is so...
And of all ages.
You
and
just
they
think
want,
about
and
Greta
they,
Thunberg is...
and they want to make a difference,
Yeah.
and they are making a difference. They're making a difference in the sector that they're working, but they're also making a difference in being part of the storytelling, right? In changing the narrative, in weaving a narrative that is much closer to where we are in the present and where we will go in the future, as opposed to being the narrative of the past.
I completely agree. It's happening, it's mushrooming, it's getting bigger, but I still feel in the mainstream people are often lacking good examples of how the world gets changed and how much power they can have to participate, because of superhero stories, because of the news story will tell you the powerful people made this decision yesterday, but not the people you don't know are powerful spent 15 years getting to the point where the powerful essentially just had to ratify a changed worldview, a changed story.
But I really, apropos of this, want all voices at the table. You know, I want those who are morally outraged. I want, you know, the protests, those people who actually are telling the story of doom and gloom, and also threat and blame are, you know, those voices are really important at this time,
yeah.
as well as, you know, the voices of moral injury, you know, of feeling the sense of shame that I've been contributing to the problem, and there's deep self-blame. I want that voice at the table. And also, you know, I remember going to see the film about James Baldwin, I'm Not Your Negro, and he was talking about moral apathy, you know, and you were saying, this is actually, in a certain way, the group of the privileged, the group who have chosen to opt out or ignore, but they're not so far from those associated with denial and addiction, you know, how we're covering up something. And part of, you know, our work has to do with, in a certain way, surfacing or uncovering the patterns that have produced the sense of disengagement from, you know, like, it's not going to affect me, or it's going to affect me in a way that there's no sort of weak flow, there's no exit out of this path.
Or I can't affect it, which is the other side of that coin. I worry, I find the doomers alarming because they've convinced a lot of people it's too late, there's nothing we can do, we don't have the solutions. And that huge amount of angst, grief, rage, anticipatory grief, I think, is really often based on a misapprehension of the circumstance, a sense that the future has already been decided rather than that we're deciding it now. So stories
all of those voices, in a way, are a misapprehension. You know, I mean, every one of those stories. I mean, there's, you know, and actually to see what is, you know, the kind of fundamental truth of the situation, you know, aside from responsibility, accountability, decision, and to, you know, sort of understand, well, this terrible joke. And I share it every once in a while, say, you know, His Holiness was asked, he said, you know, well, what do you think of the French Revolution? And he said, well, it's too early to tell. And, you know, there's this sense of, really, of not knowing. And can we both rest in the kind of openness and inquiry and curiosity and, you know, sense of possibility of going in the whole continuum of possibilities from the most terrifying to the most elevated. And can we rest in that kind of openness? That is, you know, for me, so...
Didn't we start this whole conversation with uncertainty?
I think we did.
We did.
We did.
And here
we
we
said,
are again.
and here we are drawing the circle complete about how do we embrace uncertainty.
And
Because
as a reality. That is our lived experience.
Yeah. And as the field of opportunity.
Yeah.
And possibility.
Yeah.
And maybe we should end with a full circle that brings us back to the radical uncertainty that is also radical possibility that all of us in the present engage with to make the future.
That's it.
Hey,